So earlier this week, we discussed Google's new VR app for Google Earth. And guess who's a fan? It's Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica. How's it going, Sam?
Hello, everybody. I am back in the real world after many adventures in the virtual world, as you all know.
Pulling you out of the globe, the virtual globe that is Google Earth. So you call this VR's killer app. So why, first of all, wouldn't Google release this first on its perfectly timed release of Daydream VR? It's kind of perplexing to me.
It's an interesting thing. The fact that that got announced. When it got announced, the first thing I did was look for some sort of Google Daydream announcement, because it's so perfectly timed. In fact, we had a write-up recently about Google Daydream, and yet they are favoring the HTC Vive and the Steam VR platform, just as they did with Tilt Brush, which was previously my pick for killer app for the HTC Vive. That it was made by a small team that Google acquired. I mean, the answer really would describe what is so cool about it. But the short version is you couldn't do this on Google Daydream. You couldn't reach I don't know if you could reach as many people yet. Maybe the Pixel sales are incredible, unless you're, a reseller out of New Hampshire, but that's a whole other topic. But yeah, there's a certain number of people you can reach with it. And there's a lot of stuff happening in the app that's going to require more than a smartphone to render.
So, okay, so explain that a little bit. You do call it a killer app, which is a bold statement for anything. Anytime you put that label onto something, it kind of makes your ears go boop. What about this particular experience made you say that?
I mean, I actually had editors say, "Are you sure you want to use that phrase? Because it's very loaded." I think that was the first comment at Ars Technica was, "Why are you calling it killer app?" I do not come to that phrase lightly. Google Earth, when I think of killer app for virtual reality, I think hand this to anyone, blow them away immediately, have it be simple, interesting, fun, exciting. That is how I felt about Super Mario 64 back for the N64, which is, I was a kid back then. That was my first idea of a killer app for any sort of computer, that sort of thing. And that is how I feel about Google Earth. It's basically exciting. I love it. I love the feeling of it. I could just start rambling about how awesome it is.
Did you go to any places that were like pixelated, or did you try to go to a place that didn't exist on Earth?
Well, it's interesting because the way it works, anyone who's used Google Earth's desktop app, which has been around for some time, knows that it's doing sort of a two-dimensional, three-dimensional mix.
Yeah. That
you can go, and that's changed over the years. I haven't actually used the desktop app in a long time, but that's changed as far as how much stuff is 3D rendered. And I realized that in a big way when I decided to go to Seattle CenturyLink Field and Safeco Field. I was able to grab with my hands the globe, spin to Washington State, then to Seattle, then to Seattle's downtown district, and then to these stadiums. And then I could land inside of these stadiums and stand in them. And everything inside of them was proportionally perfect. It looked...
So you, just let me get this straight. You had the whole world and you decided to go to some place that presumably you live 15 to 20 minutes away from?
Have you ever stood at the 50-yard line of the loudest NFL stadium in the nation? I haven't.
Okay.
That's a good point.
And that was really what I thought. I said, okay, well, how can it be both familiar and also exhilarating? And that really did that for me, was to think of that was the first thing I thought of, because I could also easily find it. You can't type in any location. You have to depend on grabbing and moving around, other than some pre-selected landmarks. So for Seattle wasn't really there as a pre-selected landmark. So I grabbed, I moved, I got there, stood on the 50-yard line, used the wand functions in order to shrink down. And I stood on the yard line and did one of these, whoa, crowd goes wild, wow, kind of moments. And it was cool. But you mentioned pixelation, and indeed, it doesn't look exactly like Safeco Field. There's some blobby. I said N64 stuff earlier. It kind of looks like an N64 game inside of these buildings, where the polygons aren't quite right, the textures aren't quite right, that sort of thing. But proportionally, it was perfect. So, and it also made me wonder how the heck they got that sort of scan, because it doesn't look, the way it scanned didn't look like it was taken just from the sky above. There were details that specifically looked like things that you could only get from inside. So it was an interesting sort of look at how far it's come and how much it can render in real time, because it's rendering all that stuff on the fly. You pick up a Seattle location and it just starts churning and fine tuning it until it gets to the sharpest resolution possible so that you can jump from place to place pretty quickly.
You talked a little bit about the controller. How kind of vital to the experience is the Vive controller integration into this?
The Vive controller integration is interesting because it does sort of speak to this working in the future as a sit down or not move around sort of thing. Now, the HTC Vive is best known as one of these stand and walk around and not bump into the walls because it has some safeguards. But there's more motion expected. But Google Earth VR is good at letting you move using your hands to sort of manipulate and warp and grab things. You can grab the Earth from the distance and your view will sort of periscope so that everything else is blurred except for this little preview right here in your face. That reduces nausea. It makes it easy to go very quickly and very simply without getting sick. And I think that's part of the reason I would call it killer app, because I am a canary in the coal mine in terms of virtual reality sickness. I can stomach it, but I totally notice it and, really swallow it down. And I really didn't feel that way unless I grabbed really fast. But even then, I could very quickly just stop and pause, take a breath, and be totally fine. So that's what's interesting to me, is that it does look like eventually they could transport this to nicer phones, to more powerful phones, and have it work where you don't have to walk around, where you can stand up with a cell phone on, limited tracking, and feel like you're in one of these crazy places.
Yeah, I have to imagine, even though it didn't launch on Daydream, Google is better. You better believe that's part of their priority list, is to get it there, because if it's this good, it's also a way to kind of show off a platform, and they want Daydream to work. So I hope that they do that, because I have Daydream and I don't have an HTC Vive.